Hello everyone, this is John Hayter from the Department of Environmental Science at Stockholm University, and today I will be talking to you about prioritizing risk to sewage treatment plants from potential upstream chemical spills. My co-authors within this work are Marcus Frenzel from the Käppala Wastewater Treatment Plant and Dr. Matthew McLeod, who is my PhD advisor here at Stockholm University. I would also like to acknowledge the funding source for this work as the EU Horizon 2020 Marie Curie grant associated with the EcoRisk 2050 Innovative Training Network. I'd also like to extend a special thanks to the staff at the Käppala Wastewater Treatment Plant for their help with this project and for hosting me on my secondment during my PhD. So the Käppala Wastewater Treatment Plant is located just outside of Stockholm, Sweden, and is a partnership of 11 suburbs within the Stockholm metropolitan area. It is the third largest sewage treatment plant in Sweden, treating wastewater from about 700,000 person equivalents, and it uses a mix of mechanical, chemical, and biological treatment to treat effluent before it's released to the Baltic Sea. So upstream of many wastewater treatment plants, a wide variety of chemicals might be used, either at homes or at various industrial facilities. And down the drain, spills of these chemicals can lead to toxic shock of the microorganisms that are within a wastewater treatment plant. A scenario like this occurred at a sewage treatment plant outside of Stockholm, the Sewage Wastewater Treatment Plant, where in the fall of 2013, a chemical was spilled down the drain and made its way to the treatment plant. And after about a month of the chemical having contaminated it, the nitrification capability of the microorganisms in that plant had been completely knocked out. And in the graph here on the right, we can see the outgoing ammonium plotted on the y-axis. And as a result of this toxic chemical spill and the resulting contamination, the outgoing ammonium increased by several factors for a prolonged period of time on the order of months as a result of this chemical contamination. So within the EcoRisk 2050 project, Käppala approached us with this concern about the large number of industrial facilities and chemical products that are used upstream from them. And that provides our driving question for this work. Which chemicals used upstream of the Käppala Wastewater Treatment Plant could result in damage to the treatment plant if they were to be spilled? To answer this question, we need to know three pieces of information. One, what chemicals are used and in what quantities? How toxic are these chemicals? And what will the concentrations of these chemicals be in the biologically active regions if they were to be spilled? So to answer the first question, what chemicals are used and in what quantities? Käppala conducted a survey of over 100 industrial facilities upstream, asking these facilities for a list of the chemical products that were used, the various chemical constituents within these different industrial products, and the amounts of industrial product that were held in stock at one time. They collected information from a wide variety of industrial facilities, including vehicle washing facilities, power plants, and hospitals in the Stockholm region. I'll walk you through an example of the kind of data that Käppala collected from these different facilities. So for a different facility and chemical product pair, the maximum amount of chemical held in stock at one time was collected, along with the amount of chemical used throughout the entire year, as well as the constituent chemicals within that industrial chemical product, reported as the CAS numbers of those chemicals, as well as the concentration of each of those CAS numbers within the bulk product. Now, unfortunately, for many instances, the amount of chemical product held in stock at one time was not reported, and only information on the amount of chemical product that was used was reported instead. So this sort of information was gathered for the wide range of facilities for the various chemical products used upstream of Käppala. And from that roughly 100 facilities surveyed, we've narrowed down our data set to about 60 different facilities, comprising about 1,500 different chemical products. Moving on to the second question, how toxic are these chemicals? The process engineers at Käppala are interested in the minimum concentration that a chemical would have to have within the treatment plant in order to start having an effect on the microorganisms. For our work here, we're going to focus on the microorganisms in the activated sludge regions of the treatment plant. There are microorganisms used in the anaerobic digesters, and our work might focus on that, but for now we're only focused on the activated sludge tanks. Luckily for us, the European Chemicals Agency provides a predicted no-effect concentration, or PNEC value, for sewage treatment plants for some chemicals. These toxicity values are a maximum concentration that a chemical could have within the wastewater treatment plant before it would start to have negative impacts on the microorganisms in the plant. These can be derived through a variety of tests, such as the activated sludge respiration or nitrification inhibition tests. I won't go into detail about how these toxicity values are actually derived, but I will just say that we collected about 5,500 different chemical PNEC values from the ECHO website. So moving on to our third question, what will the concentration of these chemicals be in the biologically active regions of the plant if they were to be spilled? To answer this question, we consider high-end exposure scenarios. So for each facility in each chemical product, we assume that the entire amount of chemical held on hand at one time is spilled, makes its way down the drain, and makes its way into Käppala. Once it's in Käppala, we assume that the entire mass of chemical enters only the activated sludge region, and from that volume of the activated sludge region and the mass of the chemical product, we can incorporate the chemical toxicity value to derive an estimate of the potential risk that that chemical poses to the treatment plant. I'll note here that this potential risk is calculated for each constituent chemical within an industrial chemical product based on the percent composition of that constituent chemical. Now, as I mentioned before, not all facilities report the maximum amount of chemical held in stock at one time. Rather, in many instances, only the yearly usage amount of a chemical is provided and not information on the maximum amount of chemical held in stock. We can, however, take these instances where we have information on both the maximum amount held in stock at one time and the yearly usage amount of that chemical and derive a relationship to determine the maximum number of months of chemical held in stock at one time for each instance where we have this pair of information. We had this information for about 600 different chemical products from the various facilities upstream of Käppala, and the distribution of that maximum number of months of chemical held in stock at one time is shown in this bar graph here. Now, since we're interested in high-end exposure scenarios, we could select a high-end percentile from this distribution. Here we select the 80th percentile of this distribution and use that information to extrapolate the instances where we only have a yearly usage amount of a chemical product to an estimate for the maximum amount of chemical they might have in stock at one time. So here our assumption of the 80th percentile of this distribution corresponds to about 20 months. So with this relationship, we can apply this correction factor to the instances where we only have the yearly usage data amount to estimate a maximum amount of chemical that these facilities hold in stock at one time. Once we have either reported or extrapolated information on the maximum amount of chemical product held in stock across all the various facilities, we can then run our potential risk calculation for all of the chemical constituents upstream from Käppala, and the result of those calculations are shown in the scatter plot here, where on the x-axis we have the estimated high-end exposure concentration of the chemicals in the plant, and on the y-axis we have the potential risk these chemicals pose to the plant. Now, what really stands out from this figure is that the potential risk value for the vast majority of chemicals is far below 1. For these instances where the risk value is at or above 1, we can take the information that we have to derive a prioritization list of chemicals and facilities. Such a list is shown here, where we have anonymized the facility and chemical product information, but we've retained the constituent CAS number information and also the potential risk that each chemical poses, and the method used to derive the maximum amount of chemical held in stock for our calculations. Now, for these instances where we extrapolated our yearly usage chemical amount to estimate the maximum amount of chemical held in stock at one time, the potential risk values are scalable by our selection of the percentile that we used several steps before. We had selected the 80th percentile of number of months of chemical held in stock, corresponding to about 20 months of chemical. If instead we selected the 20th percentile, which corresponds to about 2 months of chemical held in stock, the risk values here would be lowered by 1 order of magnitude, and all but one of the chemicals highlighted here in orange would still have a potential risk value above 1. Ultimately, though, Käppala can use this prioritization list of chemicals and facilities for additional information gathering to help constrain these potential risk values. It's very important to note, though, that we were only able to calculate this potential risk for instances where ECHA provided a PNEC value for our chemicals of interest. And that was only for about 59% of the chemicals within our analysis, leaving roughly 37% of chemicals without any toxicity value and thus no potential risk calculated. To fill this information gap, we are currently working on a statistical modeling method to predict these unknown PNEC values. In addition to this statistical modeling method for predicting PNEC values, further investigation is needed for those potentially high-risk facilities and chemicals based on our prioritization list, and we are also working on translating this analysis method into an open-source tool for use by other wastewater treatment plants. So the take-home message from this work is that we've developed a method for prioritizing risk to wastewater treatment plants from potential upstream chemical spills. We found that potential risk exists to Käppala from various chemicals used upstream, and the prioritization list that we developed will help facilitate communication and further information gathering with these high-risk facilities and potentially help implement spill mitigation measures if those end up being required. So if you have any questions about the work that I've presented here, I would be more than happy to meet up virtually to discuss these further. Thank you very much for your attention.